The sky above Europe was supposed to be empty that morning, or at least that's what the crew believed when their bomber climbed through the pale dawn clouds. Frost clung to the metal skin of the aircraft. The engines droned with a steady mechanical heartbeat, and inside the fuselage 10 men sat wrapped in thick flight gear, their breath turning into thin ghosts in the freezing air. They had flown missions before, dangerous ones, missions where flak burst like black flowers and enemy fighters cut through formations like knives. But today felt different. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made veterans uneasy. The bomber pushed forward through thin clouds, its silver wings glowing faintly in the rising sunlight. The pilot's gloved hands rested steady on the controls, though his eyes kept scanning the horizon. He had learned long ago that silence in war was rarely peace. It was often the pause before violence. Behind him, the crew moved through their routine checks. A gunner adjusted his ammunition belt. Another man tapped a frozen gauge to make sure it wasn't stuck. Someone muttered a joke that nobody laughed at. The cold seeped into their bones despite layers of wool and leather. At this altitude, the temperature could kill a man as surely as a bullet. Minutes passed. Then the radio crackled. Static. Then nothing. The navigator frowned, adjusting his headset. "You hear that?" he asked. The co-pilot leaned closer. Probably interference. But the pilot didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on something outside the glass. At first it was just a speck. A dark dot against the pale sky. Then it grew. Fast. Too fast. "Contact," the pilot barked. The pilot shoved the yoke, trying to bank. The heavy bomber responded slowly, like a giant, reluctant animal. It couldn't turn fast enough. Not at this distance. Not with that speed. The fighter filled the windshield. For a split second the two aircraft were eye to eye, pilots staring across open sky at each other. One man inside a massive bomber. One man inside a single-seat fighter. Two enemies suspended in the same instant of fate. Then impact came. Metal screamed. The sound wasn't like an explosion. It was sharper, more violent, like the sky itself had torn open. The bomber shuddered as something slammed into its body. The entire aircraft jolted sideways. Crewmen were thrown against bulkheads. Instruments rattled wildly. Inside the fuselage, sparks burst from a panel. A gunner lost his grip and crashed to the floor. Someone shouted a prayer. Another cursed. The pilot fought the controls. The yoke shook in his hands as if alive. "What hit us?" the navigator shouted. No one answered, because no one yet understood what had just happened. The tail gunner's voice suddenly cracked through the intercom, higher than anyone had ever heard it. "It's inside us." Silence. "What?" the co-pilot said. "It's inside the plane." The crew stared at each other, confused. Inside. That made no sense. Until the top gunner twisted in his turret and looked down through the open framework of the bomber's body. His eyes widened. Oh my God! The enemy fighter hadn't bounced off. It hadn't exploded. It had punched into them. Its nose and engine were buried deep inside the bomber's fuselage, wedged through torn aluminum ribs like a spear through bone. Half of the fighter's body was literally stuck inside the bomber, its wings mangled, its propeller bent, its cockpit crushed against the bomber's structure. For a few seconds nobody spoke. The reality was too strange for the brain to accept. War had taught them to expect death, fire, explosions. But this was something else. Something unreal. Like physics itself had broken. Smoke drifted through the fuselage. Fuel fumes filled the air. The pilot swallowed hard and tightened his grip on the controls. The bomber was still airborne, but barely. The controls felt wrong. Heavy. Dragging. As if something enormous were pulling them down. Because something was. The added weight of the embedded fighter dragged at the bomber's side, throwing off its balance. The aircraft listed slightly, one wing dipping. Warning lights flickered. "We're losing pressure," someone shouted. Another voice. "Hydraulics are damaged." The pilot's mind raced. Training. Instinct. Calculation. If the plane lost lift, they'd stall. If they stalled, they'd spin. And if they spun with that extra weight lodged inside them, they'd never recover. He forced himself to breathe slowly. Think. Control the plane. Survive first. Understand later. Outside, wind howled through the torn metal where the fighter had ripped in. Shreds of aluminum fluttered like flags. The embedded aircraft vibrated violently, threatening to tear loose or rip the bomber apart. The co-pilot whispered, almost disbelieving, "He rammed us." Not a collision. Not an accident. A deliberate strike. The realization settled over the crew like ice water. The enemy pilot had chosen this. Chosen to fly directly into them. Chosen impact. Chosen the impossible. The bomber shuddered again, a deep metallic tremor that rolled through its frame like a warning from some wounded beast. The pilot could feel every vibration through the control column, each tremble traveling into his arms, into his chest, into his bones. The aircraft wasn't just damaged. It was confused. Its balance was wrong, its airflow distorted, its center of gravity dragged sideways by the mangled enemy machine lodged in its body. He adjusted the throttle carefully. Too much power, and the damaged section might tear loose. Too little, and they'd lose altitude. The engines roared unevenly, the sound no longer the smooth, synchronized hum they were used to. Now it was jagged, strained, like a choir missing half its singers. One engine sputtered, coughed, then steadied. Another whined at a higher pitch than normal. Behind him, the crew struggled to keep their footing as the plane lurched. The gunner closest to the impact stared at the twisted mass of metal protruding through the fuselage. The enemy fighter's nose was crushed inward, its propeller bent like a warped fan blade. Fragments of glass glittered along the torn edges. Oil dripped slowly from the embedded engine, floating in dark beads before smearing across the bomber's interior wall. He swallowed hard. "I can see him," he whispered. No one replied. "I can see the pilot." The words made the air feel heavier. The co-pilot glanced back. "Alive." A pause. I don't know." The gunner leaned closer, bracing himself against a rib of the bomber's frame. Through the cracked canopy of the fighter, he could make out the figure slumped forward, harness straps taut across his shoulders. The man's helmeted head hung at an angle. One gloved hand rested near the controls. He didn't move. Smoke curled lazily from somewhere behind the fighter's instrument panel. The gunner felt something strange then. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. Another pilot. Another man who had climbed into a cockpit that morning, believing he'd fly home. The bomber jolted again, snapping him out of it. Up front, warning lights blinked in uneven rhythm. Hydraulic pressure was dropping. Fuel flow fluctuated. The pilot ran through calculations in his head, measuring distance, altitude, weight, drag. Every instinct told him the aircraft should already be falling. A bomber was never designed to carry another airplane inside it. The added mass alone should have pulled them into a fatal descent. Yet they were still in the air. Barely. Altitude needle, slowly dropping. 500 feet lost. Then another 100. The navigator's voice cut in, tight with tension. "We're descending." "I know." The pilot replied, forcing calm into his tone. He eased the yoke back slightly. The bomber responded sluggishly, like it was moving through syrup. The damaged side resisted lift, the airflow torn apart by the wreckage embedded in its body. The co-pilot wiped condensation from the windshield and scanned the sky. No escorts nearby. No friendly fighters. No clouds thick enough to hide in. Just open air and gravity waiting patiently below. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. The pilot didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved across the instrument panel, absorbing every reading, every twitching needle. He wasn't just flying anymore. He was negotiating with physics. If he tried to climb, the strain might rip the fuselage apart. If he dove, the extra weight might pull them into a spiral. If he maintained speed, structural stress could snap a wing. Every option was dangerous. Every second mattered. Behind them, a metallic groan echoed through the fuselage, the sound of stressed aluminum bending under forces it had never been built to endure. The embedded fighter shifted slightly, scraping deeper into the bomber's structure with a grinding shriek. Several crewmen flinched. "That thing's moving," someone shouted. The pilot's grip tightened. If the wreck shifted too far, it could tear open the fuselage or change their balance instantly. Either outcome meant death. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "Nobody touch it. Nobody go near it. We keep this bird steady." Steady. It sounded simple. It wasn't. Sweat trickled down his neck despite the freezing air. His gloves creaked faintly as he adjusted the controls by fractions of an inch. He could feel the plane's mood changing moment by moment, like trying to balance a spinning coin on its edge. The co-pilot suddenly pointed. Flak. Black bursts appeared ahead, small at first, then multiplying. Dark blossoms of smoke expanding in the sky. Anti-aircraft fire. The ground had spotted them. Normally, flak was terrifying. Today it felt almost absurd. because they were already fighting a battle just to stay airborne. The first explosion rocked the air nearby. The shockwave rippled through the bomber, adding another violent shudder to its wounded frame. Dust shook loose from panels. The embedded fighter rattled again. Another burst. Closer. The navigator ducked instinctively. They're zeroing in. The pilot's jaw clenched. He couldn't maneuver hard enough to evade. Sharp turns would tear them apart. He was forced to hold course, slow and vulnerable, a crippled giant limping across hostile sky. More flak bursts. One detonated below them, the blast lifting the bomber slightly before dropping it again. The sudden vertical jolt made several crewmen stumble. A wrench slid across the floor with a metallic scrape. Through it all, the pilot kept his hands steady. Breathe. Correct. Hold. Every movement was tiny, precise, measured like a surgeon's cut. Inside the torn fuselage, wind howled through jagged openings, whipping loose straps and papers into frantic motion. The smell of fuel grew stronger. Somewhere a line had ruptured. If a spark caught, he pushed the thought away. Focus. The altimeter ticked lower. Another 100 feet gone. The co-pilot watched it, voice barely audible. We're not going to hold altitude like this. The pilot knew. He'd known from the moment of impact. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was a survival problem. And survival meant one thing. Landing. But landing a bomber that had another aircraft embedded inside, it wasn't something taught in training. No manual existed. No instructor had ever described such a scenario. No checklist covered it. He would have to invent the method while doing it. Another metallic creak rolled through the plane, louder this time. The embedded fighter shifted. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead, pale and indifferent, as if the sky itself were unaware of the impossible struggle unfolding within it. The bomber limped forward through the thin air, engine straining, frame groaning, every rivet and panel under stress. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's eyes moved constantly. Instruments, horizon, engine gauges, altitude, horizon again. He wasn't just flying anymore. He was calculating survival in real time. Below them, the Earth was slowly rising. The altimeter needle crept downward with quiet, merciless patience. Another 100 feet gone. The co-pilot saw it too, but didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence between them carried the message clearly enough. They were losing the sky, inch by inch. Behind them, the embedded fighter gave a faint metallic scrape. The sound was small, but inside the bomber it felt thunderous. Every crewman stiffened. The wreck had shifted again. Not much, just enough to remind them it was still moving, still unstable, still capable of tearing them apart if gravity or vibration pulled it loose. The gunner closest to it kept his eyes locked on the twisted machine. Oil continued to drip slowly from its crushed engine, forming dark floating droplets before smearing across the bomber's interior skin. The enemy pilot inside remained motionless, head slumped, harness straps tied across his chest. Whether he was unconscious or dead, no one could tell, but his presence was undeniable. A silent witness lodged in their aircraft like a ghost that refused to leave. Another tremor ran through the bomber's frame. The pilot adjusted the trim slightly. The aircraft responded sluggishly, as though thinking about whether it felt like obeying. He could feel the imbalance constantly tugging to one side, the weight of the fighter dragging down the wing. His arms ached from the effort of holding the controls steady. Altitude, he asked quietly. The navigator checked. Dropping. Slow but steady. Altitude, he asked quietly. The navigator checked. Dropping. Slow but steady. How long till we lose lift? The navigator hesitated. At this rate, maybe 20 minutes. Less if something else fails. 20 minutes. The number hung in the cockpit like a countdown clock. The pilot nodded once. Enough time to attempt something. Not enough time for mistakes. Ahead, the clouds thinned, revealing the ground more clearly now. Fields, roads, patches of forest. No obvious runway. No friendly airstrip waiting to welcome them. Just open land and the harsh truth that whatever landing they made would be improvised. A sudden crack echoed through the fuselage. One of the crew shouted, "Structural panel just gave way." A section of torn metal near the embedded fighter peeled back farther, wind roaring through the new gap. The airflow changed instantly, slamming into the bomber's interior like a hurricane blast. Loose straps snapped violently. A clipboard ripped free and vanished out the opening. The aircraft lurched. The pilot fought it, jaw clenched. The controls bucked like something alive. For a terrifying second, the nose dipped too far, gravity grabbing hold. He pulled gently, not sharply, never sharply. The bomber obeyed, but reluctantly. Another groan rippled through the airframe. The co-pilot whispered, "She's not going to hold together much longer." The pilot didn't respond. He was staring at the ground now, measuring distance the way a man measures the depth of water before diving from a cliff. They needed a landing site. Fast. The navigator leaned forward, scanning below through the glass. There, 10 o'clock. Open fields. Long stretch. No trees. The pilot shifted his gaze. He saw it. A wide strip of farmland, pale and flat, stretching between two darker patches of forest. Uneven ground, maybe. Hard to tell from altitude. But it was long. Long enough that if he got the approach right, if the aircraft held together, if the embedded fighter didn't tear loose, if altitude, he asked quietly. The navigator checked. Dropping. Slow but steady. How long till we lose lift? The navigator hesitated. At this rate, maybe 20 minutes. Less if something else fails. 20 minutes. The number hung in the cockpit like a countdown clock. The pilot nodded once. Enough time to attempt something. Not enough time for mistakes. Ahead, the clouds thinned, revealing the ground more clearly now. Fields. Roads. Patches of forest. No obvious runway. No friendly airstrip waiting to welcome them. Just open land and the harsh truth that whatever landing they made would be improvised. A sudden crack echoed through the fuselage. One of the crew shouted, "Structural panel just gave way." A section of torn metal near the embedded fighter peeled back farther, wind roaring through the new gap. The airflow changed instantly, slamming into the bomber's interior like a hurricane blast. Loose straps snapped violently. A clipboard ripped free and vanished out the opening. The aircraft lurched. The pilot fought it, jaw clenched. The controls bucked like something alive. For a terrifying second, the nose dipped too far, gravity grabbing hold. He pulled gently, not sharply, never sharply. The bomber obeyed, but reluctantly. Another groan rippled through the airframe. The co-pilot whispered, "She's not going to hold together much longer." The pilot didn't respond. He was staring at the ground now, measuring distance the way a man measures the depth of water before diving from a cliff. They needed a landing site. Fast. The navigator leaned forward, scanning below through the glass. There, 10 o'clock. Open fields. Long stretch. No trees. The pilot shifted his gaze. He saw it. A wide strip of farmland, pale and flat, stretching between two darker patches of forest. Uneven ground, maybe. Hard to tell from altitude. But it was long. Long enough that if he got the approach right, if the aircraft held together, if the embedded fighter didn't tear loose, if the landing gear still functioned. Too many ifs. But it was the only chance they had. He spoke calmly. "That's our runway." No one argued. Behind him, the crew exchanged looks. Some nodded silently. One man crossed himself. Another tightened his gloves. No one panicked. Training and shock had fused into a strange calm. The kind men sometimes found when they realized fear wouldn't help them anymore. The pilot began adjusting their heading. Slowly, carefully. The bomber turned like a wounded whale, sluggish and resistant. The damaged side dragged, resisting the maneuver, threatening to roll them too far. He corrected gently, easing the controls with the patience of a watchmaker adjusting tiny gears. Outside, the ground crept closer. The fields grew larger. Details sharpened. Fence lines. Tracks. Shadows. The co-pilot checked the gear lever, then hesitated. "You really want to drop landing gear with that thing stuck in us?" The pilot considered it. Landing gear would help absorb impact. But extending them might shift airflow, might shake the fuselage, might dislodge the wreck. If the embedded fighter fell free during descent, the sudden change in weight could flip them instantly. He exhaled slowly. "We keep them up," he decided. Belly landing. The co-pilot nodded. It was the right call. Risky. But everything about this situation was risky. Behind them, the gunner spoke again, voice tight. It moved. Every head turned instinctively. The fighter had sagged another fraction of an inch. A thin new tear spread along the bomber's fuselage where metal had begun to split under strain. The sound was faint but unmistakable, a slow ripping whisper. The navigator swallowed. "How long before it drops?"